All right, so you're here with us on the deep dive because you're the kind of person who wants to understand complex topics, quickly and thoroughly, and we're going to help you do that today with President Trump's proposed tariffs on imported cars and auto parts.
Big topic.
Yeah, big topic, huge topic. We've been looking at economic analyses and industry reports, really trying to, pull out the stuff that you really need to know about how this could affect your wallet, the broader economy.
Right.
The mission is to give you clarity.
Exactly. We're diving deep, as the name suggests, right into this 25% tariff that's been proposed, which is basically a tax added at the border. And we're going to try to look at how it will impact car prices, the automotive industry, and then the economy as a whole.
Okay, so the first thing everyone thinks about is, all right, if there's this tariff, what's going to happen to car prices?
Yeah.
And, the estimates we've seen indicate some pretty significant increases. We're looking at potential average hikes from around $3,000 to over $5,000 per vehicle. And in some cases, bigger trucks or European imports, considerably more. Up to even $12,000, according to some analyses.
Yeah, and it's interesting what you're seeing is across the board, everyone seems to be thinking prices are going to go up. The question is just by how much.
Right. And one thing that I think is really important for people to understand is, this isn't just about cars that are fully manufactured overseas.
Right.
Even vehicles assembled here in the U.S. rely on, imported parts. And things like engines and transmissions often come from Canada and Mexico.
Exactly.
And so unless those parts are specifically exempted, under the USMCA, the cost of even, your domestic car is likely to increase.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. It's a global supply chain.
Right.
So even if the final assembly is happening here,
Yeah.
a lot of those components are coming from somewhere else.
Yeah, and one of the things that we were looking at is, this could disproportionately affect people who are, looking for more affordable transportation. We're seeing projections of over $4,000 being added to the price of cars that are, under $30,000.
Wow.
Even EVs, which we're, trying to encourage, could become more expensive because of tariffs on battery components and materials. We even have some examples, right? A Hyundai Venue could see a $4,000 to $5,000 jump. A Toyota RAV4 potentially $5,000, $7,000. So it's not just about a higher sticker price. It really suggests that this could reshape who can afford a new vehicle in America.
Yeah, I mean, when you start talking about a 15%, 20% increase on the sticker price of a new vehicle,
Yeah.
that's going to price a lot of people out of the market.
Exactly. So, we've talked about how it affects, consumers directly, but let's talk about the ripple effects within the auto industry itself, right? What's going to happen to the car companies themselves?
Yeah.
Initially you might think, okay, American manufacturers, Ford, GM, Stellantis,
Right.
they're going to be the big winners here.
You would think that, right? Because if their competitors are having to raise prices and they don't,
Yeah,
they're in a much better position.
right. But they also rely on those imported parts.
Right, exactly. And that's where it gets interesting.
Right, especially from Canada and Mexico.
And that's the thing that a lot of analysts are pointing to, is that if those parts aren't exempted, their production costs could actually rise considerably.
Yeah.
And in fact, their stock prices actually dipped when these tariffs were proposed.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so investors are clearly a little bit concerned about it.
Right. They're not sure how it's going to play out.
Yeah, they're not sure what the ultimate outcome is going to be.
And then you have foreign automakers that have set up plants here in the U.S.
Right.
What's their situation?
So they're in a slightly different situation. Their vehicles assembled in the U.S. might not see that direct impact on the final price,
Right.
but they'll still be subject to tariffs on those imported components.
Yeah.
I mean, think about, companies like BMW and Mercedes. They still import engines and transmissions for their U.S.-made models.
Right.
So even though the car is assembled here, those key components are still subject to the tariff.
Makes sense. So what about the companies that primarily import vehicles into the U.S.?
Yeah, so for those companies like Mazda, Subaru, Volvo,
Yeah.
they're looking at that direct 25% tariff on their products.
Right.
So that could lead to, pretty significant price increases, potentially reducing their sales volume,
Right.
and maybe even forcing them to discontinue certain models in the U.S.
Right.
if they become unprofitable.
Makes sense.
And then what happens to those people who would have bought a new Mazda or a new Subaru?
Right.
They're probably going to go look for a used car.
Right.
So now you've got increased demand in the used car market, but you've also got limited inventory because fewer new cars are being purchased.
Right.
So that's likely to drive up used car prices as well.
And it's not just the car makers and the the buyers feeling this. What about all the industries that kind of support,
Oh, yeah.
car industry?
It's a huge ecosystem.
Right.
So you've got domestic auto parts suppliers.
Mm-hmm.
They might see increased demand, but they could also face higher costs for their own imported materials.
Right.
You've got repair shops.
Uh-huh.
They're likely going to pay more for imported parts, which means higher repair bills for you.
Right.
Insurance companies are even anticipating potential rate increases
Wow.
because of higher vehicle values and repair costs.
So we're seeing how it branches out from just the car itself to all these other industries.
Yeah, it's like throwing a rock in a pond.
Right.
You see the ripples going out.
Exactly.
Right.
So zooming out even further, what are the broader economic consequences that we should be thinking about?
Yeah, so one of the big ones is inflation.
Uh-huh.
Higher car prices, they contribute to overall inflation
Yeah.
because transportation costs are a pretty significant part of how we measure consumer prices.
Makes sense.
And some economists are even using the term stagflationary shock
Wow.
to describe the potential outcome.
So stagflation being, rising inflation coupled with slowing economic growth.
Right, exactly.
So how could these tariffs potentially cause
And
this?
if car prices are going up, that's contributing to inflation.
Uh-huh.
But at the same time, people might be cutting back on other spending.
Right, because they're paying more for their car.
Exactly. And that reduction in consumer spending can slow down economic growth.
Right.
So you've got this kind of double whammy of rising inflation and slowing growth.
Yeah.
That's the stagflationary shock.
Okay. And then, the jobs argument is always a central one.
Right.
Right? The administration suggests that tariffs are going to, bring manufacturing jobs back to the U.S. What's the expert consensus on that?
So most economists are actually expressing concern about potential job losses.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because if manufacturers are facing higher costs
Yeah.
and there's lower demand for cars,
Yeah.
that could lead to layoffs.
Okay.
The Brookings Institution even highlights the risk of job losses in Canada and Mexico
Oh.
because our supply chains are so integrated.
Uh-huh.
We're not just talking about jobs here in the U.S.
Yeah.
We're talking about jobs across the entire region.
And, we also have to consider the potential for strained trade relationships.
Oh, absolutely.
Right, and retaliatory tariffs from our trading partners.
If we put tariffs on their cars, they might put tariffs on our goods.
Right.
And then you have this kind of escalating trade war.
Right, which could have, much wider negative economic consequences.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's a lot to consider.
It is.
I think that the key takeaway for you listening is that, these proposed tariffs are likely to lead to higher car prices here in the U.S. And there are going to be significant and complex effects that ripple through the automotive industry and the broader economy. And while there are, different perspectives on the potential benefits, the economic analyses that we've looked at largely point to, an increased financial burden for American consumers.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment.
So, it's a situation with many interconnected parts, the potential for, significant unintended consequences.
Yeah, you can't just tweak one part of the system without affecting everything else.
Right.
It's all connected.
Yeah. And so on that note, here's something to think about. Given how globally interconnected the car industry has become, what are the real long-term implications of implementing policies that aim to fundamentally reshape international trade for something as, integral to our daily lives as the automobile?
It's a really interesting question.
Yeah, it's definitely worth considering further.
I think we're just at the beginning of this conversation.
Yeah, thanks for diving deep with us.
Always a pleasure.
See you next time.
See ya.